once the Antichrist breaks his covenant, in the midst of the week, it says, in the middle of that 7 years is when he breaks that covenant of that false peace, those 7 years of false peace, or that first 3.5 years of false peace. He'll break it in the middle, and it's at that point, I believe, that the Jews, the unbelieving Jews today, are going to recognize that Jesus Christ is Lord. They're going to recognize that this false Christ that they ushered in themselves, that they built the temple for, and began, and some began to worship, has deceived them, that he's an antichrist, the Antichrist, he's not the real Christ, and their eyes are going to be opened. That's when we see this revival in the nation of Israel. And we see that in Zechariah 12:10. And it says, "And I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplications, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn." So they'll see. It talks about the piercing. It talks about they'll see him as an only son, referencing Jesus as the Son of God. Zechariah 13:6 also says, "And one shall say unto him, What are these wounds in thine hands? Then he shall answer, These with which I was wounded in the house of my friends." So that's a very important prophetic verse. I mean, it talks about the wounds in Jesus' hands, right? It's right there, the nail marks, right there in the book of Zechariah. And so this is an important prophetic verse and passage to help evangelize Jewish non-believers and to get them to see that Jesus Christ is Lord. In chapter 12, Israel mourns for God as for an only son. And in chapter 13, we see the wounds in Jesus' hands. Now, as you know, I like to point out where the modern translations of the Bible have seen many corruptions, because they're actually based on different underlying manuscripts than the King James Version. And every Bible that came before the King James, including the Tyndale, the Geneva Bible, the Bishop's Bible, all of the different Bibles that led up and culminated with the King James Version, everything post-King James actually uses different underlying Greek texts than the King James. And I've talked about that more extensively. But when there's an opportunity, I like to show where these changes matter. Remember the King James in these passages? And Zechariah said, "What are these wounds in thine hands?" Okay, in thine hands, the clear nail marks in the hands, right? But in the NIV, it says, if someone asks, "What are these wounds on your body?" they will answer, "The wounds I was given at the house of my friends." So hands, which is very specific to the crucifixion, is changed to the generic body. Now you lose the power of that verse to evangelize. And then Zechariah 13:6 in the NLT. If someone asks, "Then what about those wounds on your chest?" he will say, "I was wounded at my friend's house." So anything but the hands. You've got the body, the chest. Look at the ESV. And if one asks him, "What are these wounds on your back?" he will say, "The wounds I received in the house of my friends." So back, body, chest, not the hands though. NASB. And someone will say to him, "What are these wounds between your arms?" Then he will say, "Those with which I was wounded at the house of my friends." And do you think this is intentional? I mean, just anything but the hands? Even in the New King James Version of the Bible, which purportedly only changes the these and thys to make it more accessible to modern readers, they're changing a lot more than that. It says, and one will say to him, "What are these wounds between your arms?" Then he will answer, "Those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends." So this, among many other passages that I've shown, including removing fasting from the Bible. The famous passage on prayer and fasting is removed from modern Bibles. Other verses say that we are being saved rather than we are saved. There's many corruptions in these Bibles. And so this is why we continue to stick with the King James tried and true version of the Bible.